Hey everyone, after reading your research papers on Into the Wild, I thought this would be a good time for us to shift to something called the traditional format for an essay. And what this might do is allow us to provide a little bit of structure in your writing. And I noticed that I think that was one of the key things that was lacking in many of the research papers that I read, as well as kind of over the course of the term, noticing that maybe a little bit of structure could help improve students' writing. So we're going to shift gears and talk about the traditional format for an essay. Now, the traditional format for an essay, there are pros and cons to it. So I want you to keep in mind, as I go over the traditional format, what might work and what might be effective and then what might be ineffective. Because as we go through the next couple of weeks, we'll make some changes to the traditional format to show how it can improve your writing. So within the traditional format, they basically argue that a thesis is the most important part of an essay. So given that, we want to first of all kind of look at how we might define a thesis. And so when you look at the model of the traditional format, they define a thesis in sort of two ways. First, they say a thesis is the most important part of an essay. So in any paper that you're writing, whether it's for an English class, a history class, a poli-sci class, it is the most important thing that the instructor is looking for. Everything else is kind of filler. The traditional format says the thesis is the most important part of an essay. And the second way that they define a thesis is that, say, given a topic, taking a stand on an issue. So that's what's really key and important understanding the traditional format, is that they basically say it's taking a stand on an issue. And also for our class, really a thesis comes down to really being the key aspect of an argument, because this is what you're going to argue. So if we think about a thesis in terms of taking a stand on an issue, what it does is it allows people to not ramble in their paper, right? So if you're given the topic of the death penalty, you don't get a paper that says, well, I don't know how I feel about the death penalty. Sometimes I think it's great and can keep society safe. Other times I get sad because criminals are executed. It gets rid of all of that, and it says take a stand on an issue. And notice, by doing that, you as a writer know what you're going to argue in your paper, and the reader then knows this is going to be the argument of your essay, and how can I support that argument? And the traditional format keeps pretty simple. The first thing that it says is you always start out with a thesis. You always start out with a thesis from the beginning of your paper. Then they allow it to break it into something what we'll call later a divided thesis. And a divided thesis is just breaking up your thesis into two sentences. It's your opinion and then what you're going to argue. And then afterwards, you come up with three reasons that are going to support your thesis. And these three reasons are generally called your topic sentences. So you might have a paper that says, and I'll give a different example, but you might have a thesis that says, if a topic in a history class is who's the better president, Ronald Reagan or Franklin Roosevelt? Well, you might then have a thesis that say, I think that Franklin Roosevelt is a better president than Ronald Reagan. And then you'd say, Franklin Roosevelt did more to shape the 20th century. And then you'd introduce your three reasons by saying first. So you might say, first, FDR guided us through the Depression. Next, FDR guided us through the Second World War. And then third, his legacy is much more lasting that it defines the 20th century. The idea behind the traditional format is you start with your thesis, and then you introduce your three reasons using the words first, next, and last. And then that essentially is one big paragraph. And then what you devote throughout the rest of your essay is a paragraph to each one of those three reasons. So what I want you to do, you can kind of follow the notes and the examples that I used below, and then there's a discussion board question with a prompt in which you're going to kind of put things into the traditional format. But what I'm looking to do is to just kind of provide a sense of organization and structure in your writing, and we'll just kind of play around with the traditional format as class moves on.